Every year, as the heat of summer begins to wane, two neighboring nations celebrate their birth with a mixture of profound pride and lingering sorrow. On the 14th of August, the air in Pakistan fills with the sight of green and white flags, marking the day it emerged as a sovereign nation. Just a day later, on the 15th of August, India erupts in a sea of saffron, white and green, commemorating its own freedom from the British Empire. These two dates are not just holidays, they are the very cornerstones of national identity for over 1.7 billion people. They represent the culmination of a long and arduous struggle against colonial rule, a moment when the destiny of the subcontinent was redrawn, promising a new future for its people. The celebrations are filled with patriotic songs, grand parades, and speeches that recall the sacrifices of freedom fighters. However, these anniversaries are inextricably linked, bound by a shared history that is both glorious and tragic. They are two sides of the same coin, born from the same historical moment, the end of the British Raj. For Pakistan, August 14th signifies the creation of a homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent, a dream realized through immense political struggle and sacrifice. For India, August 15th marks its tryst with destiny, the beginning of its journey as a secular, democratic republic. Yet the joy of independence is forever shadowed by the memory of the violence that accompanied it. The story of one nation's birth is incomplete without the story of the other, and their parallel celebrations serve as an annual reminder of their shared origins and their subsequent, often painful divergence. The very proximity of these dates underscores the deep and complex relationship between the two countries. It is a bond forged not in friendship, but in a shared traumatic birth. The celebrations themselves often carry undertones of rivalry. Each nation looks at the other, comparing its progress, its military strength, and its place in the world. The speeches of leaders on these days often contain subtle and sometimes not so subtle references to the other country, highlighting grievances or asserting national strength. This annual ritual encapsulates the entire 78-year history of their relationship. Two nations, forever looking over their shoulders at each other, their identities shaped as much by their opposition to one another as by their own internal aspirations and dreams. It is really a story of two siblings who went their separate ways, but can never truly forget their common parentage. This complex beginning set the stage for everything that was to follow. The joy of freedom was immediately tempered by the immense human cost of creating these two separate states. The lines drawn on the map by a British lawyer who had never set foot in the region before were not just political boundaries. They were deep cuts through communities, families, and centuries of shared culture. The promise of a peaceful new dawn was quickly overshadowed by the darkness of communal violence, displacement, and the seeds of conflicts that would come to define their relationship for decades. Thus, the 14th and 15th of August are not just dates of celebration, but also solemn days of remembrance for the millions who were lost in the chaotic and bloody process of partition, a historical reality that continues to shape the present. The year 1947 marked the end of nearly 2 centuries of British rule in India, but the moment of liberation was also a moment of profound division. The British, weakened by World War II and facing an unstoppable independence movement, decided to grant freedom, but also to partition the subcontinent. The logic behind this decision was rooted in the two-nation theory, a political ideology championed by the All India Muslim League. This theory argued that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations, each with its own culture, religion, and social customs, and therefore could not coexist peacefully within a single state. The Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, demanded a separate homeland for Muslims, which they would call Pakistan, meaning land of the pure. This demand was fiercely contested by leaders of the Indian National Congress, like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who envisioned a united, secular India. Ultimately, the British government, in its haste to withdraw, accepted the principle of partition. The task of drawing the new borders fell to a British lawyer, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who was given just 5 weeks to divide a land of immense diversity and complexity. The Radcliffe Line, as it came to be known, cut through the provinces of Punjab and Bengal, bisecting villages, farms, and even houses. This arbitrary line, drawn with little regard for the social and economic fabric of the regions, triggered one of the largest and most violent migrations in human history. Millions of Muslims traveled west and east to what would become Pakistan, while millions of Hindus and Sikhs moved in the opposite direction towards the new borders of India. The process was anything but peaceful. As law and order collapsed, long-suppressed communal tensions exploded into horrific violence. Trains carrying refugees were attacked, and entire villages were massacred by mobs from the opposing community. An estimated 1 to 2 million people were killed in the ensuing chaos, and over 15 million were displaced from their ancestral homes, becoming refugees in their own land. The stories from this period are filled with unimaginable horror and heartbreak, tales of families torn apart, fortunes lost overnight, and a level of brutality that left permanent scars on the collective psyche of both nations. This trauma of partition became the foundational experience for both India and Pakistan, an event that has been passed down through generations and continues to fuel suspicion and hostility. The creation of two separate countries from the fabric of one did not resolve the underlying tensions. In many ways, it institutionalized them. The division left a legacy of unresolved issues and a deep sense of grievance on both sides. India felt that partition was a tragic vivisection of its motherland, while Pakistan felt it had been given a moth-eaten state, deprived of key territories and resources. This foundational bitterness meant that the two new nations began their independent existence not as friendly neighbors, but as bitter rivals. The ink on the partition documents was barely dry before the first of many conflicts erupted, setting a precedent for a relationship that would be defined by antagonism, war, and a seemingly endless cycle of mistrust for the next 7 decades and beyond. Among the many unresolved issues left behind by the hasty British departure, none has been more persistent or poisonous than the dispute over the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. At the time of partition, the more than 500 princely states under British suzerainty were given the choice to accede to either India or Pakistan, or theoretically to remain independent. The decision was left to their rulers. For most states, the choice was straightforward, based on geography and the religion of the majority population. However, Kashmir was a complex exception. It was a Muslim-majority state ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh. He initially hoped to remain independent, delaying his decision to join either dominion. This hesitation created a power vacuum that both India and Pakistan sought to fill, setting the stage for the first of their many wars. In October 1947, just 2 months after independence, Pashtun tribal militias from Pakistan's northwest frontier province, supported by elements of the Pakistani army, invaded Kashmir. Their aim was to capture the state's capital, Srinagar, and force its accession to Pakistan. As the invaders advanced, the terrified Maharaja made a desperate appeal to India for military assistance. India agreed to help, but on one condition, that Hari Singh formally accede the state of Jammu and Kashmir to India. He signed the Instrument of Accession on October 26, 1947, and Indian troops were airlifted to Srinagar the very next day. This marked the beginning of the First Kashmir War, a conflict that solidified the division of the state and sowed the seeds of perpetual mistrust between the two nascent countries. The war ended in 1949 with a United Nations brokered ceasefire, which established a demarcation line that has since become known as the Line of Control. This line effectively partitioned Kashmir, with India controlling roughly 2/3 of the territory, including the Kashmir Valley, Jammu, and Ladakh, while Pakistan administered the western and northern parts, which it calls Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. The UN resolution also called for a plebiscite, a vote by the Kashmiri people to decide their own future. But this vote has never been held. India has long argued that Pakistan failed to meet the prerequisite of withdrawing all its forces, while Pakistan accuses India of denying Kashmiris their right to self-determination. This unresolved status of Kashmir has remained the central pillar of the India-Pakistan conflict. This initial dispute over Kashmir created a foundational narrative of betrayal and aggression on both sides. For Pakistan, India's acceptance of the accession was a fraudulent act designed to rob it of a Muslim-majority state that was geographically and culturally contiguous. For India, Pakistan's support for the tribal invasion was an act of naked aggression, an attempt to seize territory by force. This deep-seated mistrust has poisoned every aspect of their relationship, turning the picturesque valleys of Kashmir into one of the most heavily militarized zones in the world. Every diplomatic initiative, every trade negotiation, and every cultural exchange has been held hostage to this single, intractable issue. The Kashmir conundrum is not just a territorial dispute. It is the original sin from which nearly all other conflicts between India and Pakistan have flowed. The initial conflict over Kashmir in 1947 and 48 was not an isolated event, but the opening chapter in a long and bloody saga of warfare between India and Pakistan. The deep-seated animosity and the unresolved territorial claims ensured that the line of control would remain a flashpoint for decades to come. The two nations have fought 3 more major wars, each leaving a trail of destruction and deepening the chasm of hostility. These conflicts did not just result in military casualties and territorial adjustments, they became defining moments in the national consciousness of both countries, reinforcing narratives of heroism on one side and villainy on the other. Each war added another layer of grievance, making the prospect of lasting peace seem ever more distant and unattainable. The history of the subcontinent since 1947 is, in many ways, a history of these wars. The second major conflict erupted in 1965, again with Kashmir at its epicenter. Pakistan, believing that the Kashmiri population was ready to rise up against Indian rule, launched a covert operation to infiltrate fighters across the line of control. The plan, codenamed Operation Gibraltar, failed to trigger the expected uprising and instead provoked a full-scale military retaliation from India. The war expanded beyond Kashmir, with major tank battles fought in the plains of Punjab. After weeks of intense fighting that resulted in thousands of casualties on both sides, a UN-mandated ceasefire was eventually declared. The war ended in a stalemate, with both sides returning to their pre-war positions. Despite the inconclusive outcome, both India and Pakistan claimed victory, using state propaganda to bolster national morale and further demonize the enemy. The most decisive of all their conflicts came in 1971. This war, however, did not originate in Kashmir, but in the political turmoil in East Pakistan, which is now modern-day Bangladesh. The people of East Pakistan, feeling politically marginalized and culturally dominated by West Pakistan, launched a massive movement for autonomy. The Pakistani military responded with a brutal crackdown, leading to a humanitarian crisis and a flood of millions of refugees into India. India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, decided to intervene militarily in support of the Bengali liberation movement. The ensuing war was swift and conclusive. Within 2 weeks, the Indian army, along with Bengali freedom fighters, defeated the Pakistani forces in the east, leading to the creation of the independent nation of Bangladesh. It was a humiliating defeat for Pakistan, which lost half its population and a significant portion of its territory. The most recent major armed conflict took place in 1999 in the Kargil district of Kashmir. In a serious breach of trust, Pakistani soldiers and irregulars infiltrated across the line of control and occupied strategic high-altitude posts on the Indian side. The move was designed to sever the strategic highway linking Srinagar to Leh and force India to negotiate on Kashmir. The Indian military responded with a large-scale operation to recapture the peaks. The Kargil conflict was particularly dangerous because it was the first direct military confrontation between the two nations after they had both officially become nuclear powers. Though the conflict remained limited to the Kargil sector, it brought the subcontinent to the brink of a wider war. Ultimately, international pressure and determined Indian military action forced Pakistan to withdraw its forces. Like the wars before it, Kargil inflicted immense suffering but resulted in no erasure, only in reinforcing the bitter status quo. The trajectory of the India-Pakistan rivalry took a dramatic and honestly terrifying turn in the latter half of the 20th century with the introduction of nuclear weapons. This development fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of the subcontinent, transforming the nature of their conflict from one of conventional warfare to one of existential threat. India's nuclear journey began much earlier, culminating in its first so-called peaceful nuclear explosion in 1974, codenamed Smiling Buddha. While India insisted the test was for peaceful purposes, Pakistan saw it as a direct threat to its national security. This event triggered a determined, clandestine effort by Pakistan to develop its own nuclear capability, famously articulated by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who vowed that Pakistanis would eat grass if necessary to match India's nuclear prowess. The nuclear arms race in South Asia had, officially begun. For over 2 decades, both countries maintained a policy of nuclear ambiguity, possessing the capability but not openly declaring it. This changed in May 1998. In response to growing security concerns, India conducted a series of 5 nuclear tests, officially declaring itself a nuclear weapons state. The international community reacted with alarm and sanctions, but the most significant response came from just across the border. Less than 3 weeks later, Pakistan conducted its own series of nuclear tests in the Chagai Hills, restoring what it termed strategic balance to the region. The subcontinent was now home to 2 openly declared rival nuclear powers, and the world watched with bated breath. The very real possibility of a nuclear exchange now loomed over any future conflict. The immediate consequence of this nuclearization was the emergence of a powerful deterrent. The concept of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, which had kept the peace between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, now applied to South Asia. The logic is simple and frankly chilling. A full-scale conventional war between India and Pakistan now carries an unacceptable risk of escalating to the nuclear level. The destruction that would follow such an escalation would be so catastrophic for both nations that no political or military objective could possibly justify it. This nuclear overhang has effectively placed a ceiling on the level of conflict, making an all-out war aimed at conquering or erasing the other side a suicidal proposition. This is why, despite the intense Kargil conflict in 1999, both sides took deliberate steps to ensure the war remained localized. However, nuclear deterrence is not a guarantee of peace. It is a guarantee against total war. While it has prevented another large-scale conflict like those of 1965 or 1971, it has not stopped lower-level violence. In fact, some analysts argue that the nuclear shield has made the region more dangerous in some ways, by emboldening Pakistan to support proxy conflicts and cross-border militancy in Kashmir, believing that India's response will be constrained by the fear of nuclear escalation. This has led to a perpetual no-peace, no-war situation, characterized by border skirmishes, terrorist attacks, and surgical strikes. The nuclear shadow, therefore, acts as a reluctant and imperfect peacemaker, preventing annihilation but failing to foster genuine stability or trust. Beyond the military and nuclear dimensions, the sheer demographic and economic realities of the subcontinent make the notion of one country erasing the other a practical impossibility. India is a nation of over 1.4 billion people, and Pakistan is home to more than 240 million. Combined, they represent more than 1/5 of the entire human population. The idea of one state conquering, occupying, and absorbing a population of such magnitude is simply not feasible in the 21st century. The logistical, financial, and human cost of such an undertaking would be astronomical and honestly unsustainable. Any attempt at total war would not lead to victory, but to mutual ruin on an unprecedented scale, creating a humanitarian crisis that would dwarf any seen in modern history. The sheer size of their populations acts as a powerful, non-military deterrent to total conflict. Furthermore, the fates of India and Pakistan are not decided in a vacuum. The region is of immense strategic importance to global powers, each with its own vested interests. The United States has historically tried to balance its relationship with both countries, seeing India as a democratic counterweight to China and Pakistan as a crucial partner in counter-terrorism and regional stability, especially concerning Afghanistan. More recently, under President Trump's second term, a shift in tone has been noted, with more diplomatic overtures towards Pakistan, much to India's displeasure. China, on the other hand, is Pakistan's staunchest ally, having invested billions of dollars in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a cornerstone of its Belt and Road Initiative. China's strategic partnership with Pakistan serves to contain its regional rival, India. These international entanglements create a complex web of alliances and rivalries that effectively prevent an all-out war. Any major conflict would inevitably draw in these global powers, risking a much wider and more dangerous confrontation. Neither the United States nor China has any interest in seeing the region descend into a catastrophic war that would destroy their strategic investments and destabilize a critical part of the world. Consequently, international diplomacy often plays a crucial role in de-escalating tensions during crises, as was seen during the Kargil conflict and subsequent standoffs. The global stakes are simply too high for the world to allow India and Pakistan to engage in a fight to the finish. The interests of Washington and Beijing act as powerful external constraints on the actions of New Delhi and Islamabad. Finally, economic and environmental interdependence, though strained, adds another layer of complexity. Despite frozen diplomatic ties, the two nations are bound by a shared geography. A critical example is the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty, a water-sharing agreement that has remarkably survived multiple wars. However, this treaty is now under severe threat. In 2025, India's refusal to reinstate the treaty has escalated tensions, as it threatens the water supply for a vast majority of Pakistan's agriculture. This highlights how modern conflicts can be waged through control of resources. While such economic pressure can be a weapon, it also underscores a shared vulnerability. A collapse of the regional ecosystem, whether through water disputes or the environmental fallout of a conflict, would be disastrous for both sides, respecting no man-made borders. The very concept of one sovereign nation completely erasing another is, frankly, an anachronism in the contemporary global order. The era of empires and conquests, where powerful states could simply swallow their weaker neighbors, has largely passed. The modern international system is built upon the principle of national sovereignty, a cornerstone of the United Nations Charter. While this principle is not always perfectly respected, the global community for the most part does not tolerate the outright annihilation of a member state. Any attempt by either India or Pakistan to launch a war of conquest would be met with overwhelming international condemnation, crippling economic sanctions, and complete diplomatic isolation. The aggressor nation would find itself a pariah on the world stage, its actions deemed illegitimate by the global consensus. This international norm is powerfully reinforced by the nuclear reality of South Asia. The presence of nuclear arsenals on both sides of the border makes the cost of total war infinite. As discussed, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, often called MAD, ensures that any leader contemplating a first strike would also be signing the death warrant of their own nation. It is, in effect, a suicide pact. The only victory in a nuclear exchange would be to inflict slightly less absolute devastation than one receives. This is not a strategic calculation that any rational leader could make. Therefore, the nuclear deterrent acts as the ultimate check on any fantasy of erasure. It forces both military and political establishments to operate within the bounds of limited conflict, ensuring that skirmishes, however dangerous, do not escalate into a civilization-ending war. Even beyond the political and military impossibilities, the cultural and historical connections between the people of India and Pakistan make the idea of erasure nonsensical. Despite 78 years of political hostility, the people of the two nations share deep-rooted linguistic, cultural, and historical ties that predate the 1947 partition by centuries. From a shared love for Bollywood films and classical music to common culinary traditions and family histories that span the border, a vast reservoir of shared heritage exists. Many families were split by the partition, with relatives living on both sides. This shared humanity, though often obscured by political rhetoric, creates a fundamental bond that cannot be erased by military force. Erasing one nation would mean erasing a part of the other's own history and identity. Therefore, the question is not whether India and Pakistan can erase each other, but why this violent rhetoric persists despite its practical impossibility. The answer often lies in domestic politics. For hardline elements on both sides, the other serves as a convenient scapegoat and a powerful tool for mobilizing nationalist sentiment. Warlike rhetoric can be used to distract from internal problems like economic crises or political instability, and to consolidate power by presenting leaders as strong defenders of the nation. This is why, even as of 2025, aggressive statements like PM Modi's warning to eat bread peacefully, or else my bullet is there, persist. The idea of erasure survives not as a viable military strategy, but as a toxic political narrative that serves the interests of a few at the expense of the many. In a world where total war is rendered unthinkable by nuclear weapons and global norms, the rivalry between India and Pakistan has largely shifted from the physical battlefield to more subtle yet equally intense arenas. The primary conflict today is waged not with tanks and fighter jets, but through economic policy, diplomatic maneuvering, and the powerful tools of information warfare. Each nation is engaged in a relentless campaign to advance its own interests and undermine the others on the global stage. This modern competition is a long game, played out in the corridors of international forums, on the screens of global media, and across the digital expanse of the internet. It is a war of perception, influence, and strategic advantage. One of the key modern battlegrounds is the economy. Both countries understand that national power in the 21st century is increasingly defined by economic strength. India has sought to leverage its larger, faster-growing economy to isolate Pakistan, restricting trade and investment. The recent threat to the Indus Waters Treaty is a prime example of using economic and resource leverage as a tool of statecraft. Conversely, Pakistan has sought to counter this by strengthening its economic ties with powerful allies, most notably China through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This project is not just an economic lifeline for Pakistan, but also a major geopolitical move that deepens its strategic alignment with Beijing, creating a formidable bloc that challenges India's regional dominance. The economic contest is about building resilience at home while limiting the options of the adversary abroad. Diplomacy is another crucial front. Indian and Pakistani diplomats are locked in a perpetual struggle to shape the global narrative, particularly on the issue of Kashmir. India works tirelessly to portray Pakistan as a state that sponsors terrorism, a narrative that has gained significant traction globally, especially after major attacks traced back to Pakistan-based groups. Pakistan, in turn, attempts to highlight the human rights situation in Indian-administered Kashmir, framing India as an occupying power that is suppressing the will of the Kashmiri people. This diplomatic battle is fought at the United Nations, in the capitals of major world powers, and at multilateral forums like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Even when leaders meet at these summits, as seen in 2023 and 2024, bilateral talks are explicitly avoided, turning these events into platforms for projecting national positions rather than resolving disputes. Finally, the most pervasive battle is the one for hearts and minds, waged through media and information. Both countries utilize state-backed media, social media campaigns, and armies of online commentators to promote their national narratives and discredit the other side. This information war fuels hyper-nationalism and deepens public animosity, making it even more difficult for moderate voices to be heard. Every border skirmish, political statement, or cricket match is spun into a larger story of national pride and enemy treachery. This constant barrage of hostile propaganda ensures that the rivalry is not just confined to governments and armies, but is felt deeply by ordinary citizens. In this new era, the first casualty is often not a soldier, but the truth itself, as both sides fight to control a narrative that can be more powerful than any weapon. As we look back upon 78 years of a troubled and often tragic relationship, history offers one clear and unequivocal lesson. The path of perpetual conflict is a dead end. The 4 wars, the countless border skirmishes, The nuclear brinkmanship and the endless cycle of accusations have inflicted immense pain and suffering on millions of people, but they have failed to achieve any lasting resolution. Neither nation has been able to impose its will on the other, nor has either come close to being erased. Instead, the conflict has only succeeded in draining precious resources that could have been used to fight their real common enemies: poverty, illiteracy, and disease. The military build-ups have come at the cost of human development, and the political hostility has prevented the region from realizing its true economic potential. The historical record is a testament to the futility of this rivalry. The borders drawn in 1947, solidified by the line of control in 1949, have remained largely unchanged despite decades of bloodshed. The nuclearization of the subcontinent in 1998 did not bring victory, only a more terrifying form of stalemate. The current diplomatic freeze in place since 2019 has yielded nothing but a dangerous silence, where the risk of miscalculation is high. History teaches that while confrontation may serve short-term political interests, it inevitably leads to long-term strategic stagnation. The cost of this conflict, measured in human lives, economic opportunity, and regional stability, has been devastatingly high for both India and Pakistan. It is a price that future generations should not have to continue paying. The inescapable reality is that India and Pakistan are neighbors, bound together by an unchangeable geography and an inseparable history. They can choose to be sworn enemies, forever locked in a destructive embrace, or they can choose to be peaceful neighbors who, while disagreeing on certain issues, recognize the overwhelming benefits of cooperation. The logic of coexistence is not based on sentimentality or a naive hope for friendship, but on a pragmatic understanding of their own national interests. A stable and prosperous Pakistan is in India's interest, just as a stable and prosperous India is in Pakistan's interest. Trade, cultural exchange, and joint efforts to tackle regional challenges like climate change and water scarcity offer a far more promising future than endless military confrontation. Ultimately, the choice lies with the leaders and people of both nations. They can remain prisoners of a bitter past, repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results, or they can learn from history's painful lessons and forge a new path. It will require immense political courage, a willingness to move beyond maximalist positions, and a genuine effort to build trust, one small step at a time. The journey will be long and difficult, and there will be many setbacks. But the alternative, a future of endless conflict under a nuclear shadow, is simply too catastrophic to contemplate. The greatest lesson history offers is that survival and progress lie not in the ability to destroy one another, but in the wisdom to find a way to live with one another.